Welcome back to Confronting the Line. This is producer Tony. I wanted to just record a quick introduction to this episode. So Brian and I have been friends for about 20 years, and it was a real honor to have him on the podcast to share his story. And I did want to let you all know that this episode was actually really hard for me to listen to. And I imagine for a lot of you, it'll also be difficult to hear some of what he talks about. Um, there are conversations here about combat situations that involve children during the War on Terror and Operation Enduring Freedom during the first push in 2002 under the Bush administration. So just keep that in mind. Take your time with watching the episode. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Watch it in pieces if you have to. I think it's worthwhile to sit through. I broke the episode up into two pieces. So part one is really more about like his story about going to war. And then the second part, we're going to talk about the impact of PTSD and the work with transformational technology and how and dealing with that. I am really happy with how the episode turned out. So, enjoy.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Confronting the Line, where we are here to explore the often blurry line between transformation and exploitation, between what's helpful and what's harmful in the world of personal development and wellness. And I'm super excited about this conversation in particular. As many of you know, I've shared through time, and I share in my book a little bit about my daughter has been diagnosed with complex PTSD due to sustained things that happened in her childhood. And that's in no small part why we're here talking today, because that was something that I had to really address. Like, some really awful things happened to her while I was off transforming the world, and had a literally lifelong impact on her and the life that she gets to live. So the other thing it's done is it's had me become a very armchair. I feel like I'm a armchair as lived, as we used to say, master's degree in trauma, and I'm working hard learning more since my book came out, particularly about trauma and trauma recovery, as literally hundreds of staff and program leaders from the organization that I used to work for have come to me and expressed impacts, long-term negative impacts, and in some cases have been diagnosed themselves with complex trauma, totally always in part to their participation, but definitely their participation exacerbated that in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to talk with our guest today, Brian Arbor. Brian has been a part of our book club, which is a Facebook group that we have with people who are really out to explore this stuff. We're out to explore what is helpful, what is harmful, what's the good stuff, what's the bad stuff that we didn't see, bad meaning it had some kind of a negative impact on our emotional, spiritual, or physical life. So Brian's been a part of that conversation for a while. We kind of knew of each other, I would say, in our time together at Landmark. We'll get your full story in a minute, but I just really want to share, you've been sharing about this particular thing about PTSD and sort of what works and doesn't work in the self-help, personal development, LGADI world. And when it comes to that, and you're in a very, very, not unique so much because other people are in the same position, but in a very as lived on the court position to talk about that, because you are a combat veteran. So not only are you a veteran of Landmark staff, which I think should have its own designation now, but you are an actual combat veteran who, through the Army National Guard, was deployed and engaged in Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. So it wasn't just your participation in a high control group at a young age that sort of set your life on a particular course, but going straight from that into a combat zone and being in active combat. So you're the perfect person to talk about it. And I love to talk about this stuff. Yes, we talk with the experts. We got Dr. Glenn Doyle on call and things like that. But I think talking to people who really live this stuff is some of the most valuable insight that we can get. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Anything you want to say by way of introduction, saying hi to the audience, Brian?
Right. I appreciate the intro and the chance just to be here and share about what what it's been like. And for anybody who's engaging in the mental work, the emotional work of untangling yourself from what you've been through, just thank you for sticking with it and engaging in that work and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not easy. And it's not fast. I mean, that's one of the first big misnomers is I even share a story in my book of a forum leader telling me that in a seminar, they cured somebody's PTSD. And I had to explain to him, I'm like, it's not a thing. That person may have gotten some insight or even a breakthrough in that moment where they felt better about something they were dealing with that was likely an aspect brought on with their PTSD journey, but he didn't cure the PTSD. So, but that is how a lot of self-help people talk and how they think. Like they really do believe it. I want to be clear. Like, I actually think some of the most exploited people are the practitioners, teachers, and coaches. And in part because they really are convinced through all kinds of methods and certification programs and blah, 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 that somehow that technology that they've gotten hold of is the answer. And if I have learned anything in this journey, it is there is no the answer. Anyway, why don't we start with giving you a chance to tell us so that this episode came about in part because you were talking with us on a call a few weeks back and you really told us about your sort of unique journey and some of the things that's led you to. So why don't we start there? Let's start with your journey.
Yeah. So I first did the landmark forum. I was, I don't know, like 18, 19 years old. So it was a formative time in my life, a very formative experience, seemed to affirm a lot of I was an avid self-help reader. I wanted to understand myself and other people and how things worked.
What got you into the because one of the things that's common is like the ways people sort of participate in these large group awareness trainings are.
I had a family member um, who uh, was engaged with Landmark, and I think at that point was already on staff. And just she was somebody that I would talk to about like the big ideas and the dealing with the things that had already happened to me in life. And she just was an advocate for me doing the Landmark Forum as soon as possible. And it took waiting until I was 18 and had like the autonomy to go do that. So
Gotcha. Okay, so there wasn't like some life incident or whatnot. It's just something you
yeah, it wasn't a particular incident or trigger that like really just shoved me over the edge. It was more like it seemed like a good fit.
And was it? How was it for you?
It resolved things that I thought were unresolvable for myself. My relationship with my mother changed forever. We have conversations now, like after 20 plus years, that just wouldn't have come about. There's a friendship there that is unusual. So, and I had the opportunity to just acknowledge and forgive what I held against her. She was like 21, 22 when she had me.
That's so funny you say that. I'll literally never forget the moment that the person who led I did the Landmark Forum twice as a participant. The person who led my first one, forum leader, Alan Kahn, put up on the stage the youngest male in the room and the youngest female in the room. And he goes, okay, these are your parents. And in that moment, I was like, they went from being these idealized or failed idealized, because I would say that's how most of us relate as we come into adulthood, right? Our parents are like good at some things and pretty bad at others, and we're kind of judgy about that. And then, but he did that, and I was like, oh my gosh, because my mom was barely 18. My dad was 20 when they got married with me in the belly. They were a mess. I mean, they were just a mess in a lot of ways. And in that moment, I could see like, oh, they became human. And to me, that's fundamentally, this is the healthy part about what I think the programs like the Landmark Forum, because the Landmark Education is not the only one that offers these kind of programs. But as I continue to study it, to me, the valuable part is it's not that it does something to us. Well, it does, but we'll get to that later. But the thing that happens there is whatever it is we go in, that's kind of up for us that we're looking at, we get a new way of seeing it. We get a shift in perspective. And a shift in perspective isn't in and of itself change, but it is the beginning of change. right? So it's that doorway, and then we can go through the doorway and we can explore. One of the things I always encourage people is, yes, you had that breakthrough, that insight at that particular program, and that's great. And it's great to just say that, even like, oh yeah, I would participate in this program, da da da, whatever. But never doubt that it was you and your participation, not the program.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everybody who went through the program would get the exact same thing, right? Like if it was truly just the program, like then everybody would come out. And I think we call that brainwashing. But anyway, other conversation.
Well, so my mother's birthday was yesterday. So I call and I still do that thing that I learned how to do 20 plus years ago in the Landmark Forum. I love it. And I'm 42, turning 43 this year. And I am now the age my mom was when I shipped off to war.
Wow.
So she was shocked. She was like, wow, I never thought about that.
Mhm.
Crazy. It was like, so I'm over here imagining I now have a 19, 20-year-old kid who's going off into a war zone. And what would it be like to be that human being?
Mhm.
Like, how would I cope? What would it be like for me to be in those shoes? Right. So as as I continue to look, like I'm constantly enriching my relationship with my mom. And that really began in the Landmark Forum. I just kind of decided I wanted to be happy more than I wanted to hold someone else responsible
Mhm.
for everything that was wrong in my life.
Right.
And that's another part of transitioning into adulthood, right? Like it stops all being somebody else's problem. So we had that conversation, and like a lot's been bubbling up. I landed in the book discussion right at the right time in my life. I um, just completed like 5 to 6 months cognitive processing therapy cycle with the VA. So I was 19, 18, 19, did the Landmark Forum, completed their curriculum for living, the Landmark Forum advanced course in the self-expression leadership program. Then in the midst of that time, I had graduated, I had started college, and I uh, left college to move to Chicago, so I was driving 5.5 hours every week one way to get to my self-expression leadership program, and then I would crash in the city with some graduate friend and then head back. So I moved to Chicago partly for a new relationship, partly so I could be closer to the center. And very shortly after, I like my National Guard unit deployed, and I was like all of a sudden full-time Army, headed over to Kuwait and Iraq for all the stuff that was starting to unfold in 2002. I graduated high school in 2001. 2002, I'm like headed to war. And I have this view of life, like a personal responsibility to change the world. Like I get to say what happens around me and in my world. I get to invent who I am in response to or in the face of anything.
Well, I think you're articulating there very much. I mean, Landmark will be very pleased about this interview up to this point, anyway. That, because it's sort of fundamentally the thing that happens quietly. So I would say it's the fuel for about 80% of the people that are going through the program. Becomes like, as you're going, especially by the time you hit self-expression and leadership program, which has a structure in which you create a community project and it's about sort of being of service and doing good in the world and all this. So if you have that kind of empathy and compassion and you want to be somebody who makes your life matter, like they play on that. They count on that a big time, big, big, big time. And I think that goes all the way back to when Werner's, registrations were lagging in the EST days, which is the foundation. Werner kind of hit upon these, like he meets Buckminster Fuller, and he hits on this thing where if you just bring in an altruistic mission that's positive, you can bring in a lot of people. And they did that a lot through the initiation of the Hunger Project, which I always say it's an organization I support today. I love what it's become. but I'm not blind to that it was started in large part to get registrations into EST. Because if you got people out there going like, hey, making these big, bold declarations, we can end hunger. I think it was by 1998 they were going to end hunger. Anyway, that's impressive. And people want to go, well, I want to be that kind of person. And it's just a really, really great sign up tool. It's some people go so far as to call it a kind of weaponizing of empathy. I think that's a little strong at that stage, just because what you are using is people's desire to do good to make sales. Now, Landmark did back it up, I think, somewhat with programs like Self-Expression Leadership. I led that program, and there were community projects that are still going on today that made a difference in communities and so on. But that becomes in large part the onus and responsibility of the participant, of the graduate, which is fine. That's great. I'm not saying that as a criticism at all, but I think you just kind of outlined really well. So it's interesting. So you're doing this Landmark, you're between high school and whatnot. You're obviously enrolled in the National Guard in some way, which is also about being up to something big, as I understand it. I've never been in the military. I've worked with a lot of people who are in the military. But one thing I'm always struck by people who are in our military is, some of them, yes, they're there. They want to get an education. They want to get a steady paycheck. They want, there's a lot of practical reasons to be in the military, but they're also about serving. Our country is actually based on service, true service, being of service. And our military is based on that a lot. So it's no accident, I think, that you resonate particularly with that aspect, because some people go through Landmark and they don't really care about that. They just want to get better at their job, or they want to deal with this relationship problem, or they just want to, and then there's a certain percentage that I swear to God just want to dominate everybody.
There's a promise in the Landmark Forum that anything you want, absolutely anything you want for yourself and your life, is available out of your participation in the Landmark Forum. So I walked in with an impossible prove it.
Mm,
My prove it was my relationship with my mom.
gotcha.
And like partway through day 2, I saw it's a two-sided relationship. I saw what I was doing and what I was like actively holding against her and unwilling to let go of. That if I were to shift myself away from like that fixed point, something else might be available. And then they have this whole thing, you call, you share, they're like tenets and like structures for how you keep those kinds of commitments or possibilities alive.
I used to teach people in the wisdom course, anything you say after I have been such a fool will likely turn out.
And the way that Landmark lays out possibilities and futures has the participant had me engage in having to constantly be like a generator, a fountain for that future. Like I was just constantly putting out more and more and more. And anything that wasn't consistent with what I was committed to, disregard. So we're starting to crack into what's healthy, what's not healthy, right?
Yeah.
Disregarding the things that like should be responsibly considered, and just generating the what I want, generating the what I'm committed to all the time. I walked into a war zone surrounded by people who didn't have a similar mindset. Like, let alone my personality and like who I am as a human being was very out of place in the military. I also had reconciled with myself by the time I deployed that I was gay. And it was a don't ask, don't tell administration. So, like, I'm afraid for my life from my peers and have to hide sufficiently to have like a culpable deniability.
Right. Right. So you're not just hiding from the enemy, you're hiding from your peer. Yeah. Right. Wow. Okay. That's intense.
And I walk in, like, I know I'm about to face this huge thing. I know that I don't believe in the cause behind this war. I know that I don't trust the administration that I'm commanded by. So I invent something to live into that gives me power, something that gives me freedom to feel like I'm engaged in something that actually matters, that my life is for something that I'm pleased by and empowered by. And there are times when you create those things that they stick. Like it's like they're tattooed in your soul. I invented a future for myself of beauty, family, and connection. And I walked into the desert for beauty, family, and connection. I carried a rifle and followed orders for beauty, family, and connection. And I put myself in service of that future. And part of what happens in that scenario is I like looking back, right? I disassociate from where I am, from what I'm in service to. And it's not like those things become invisible. I know they're there. I feel them.
Right.
And I am constantly, if I were going to use kind of base level words, I'm constantly at war, not only in the war, but with the reality that I'm surrounded.
Gotcha. Right. Because you're kind of creating this screen, as it were, something, would you say beauty, community, family, right?
Beauty.
Beauty, family, community. So that's really interesting. I saw a post. I put it up in our Facebook group, actually. There was a post the other day where somebody was talking about this whole thing, or maybe a book I'm reading. I'm reading John Atack's Opening Our Minds right now, and it's blowing my mind. But anyway, this whole idea, which is very, very fundamental, certainly to Landmark's lexicon, and I would assert many others, its counterparts, LifeSpring and Context and blah, 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 whatever. And there's lots of different pop-ups. And now this has invaded personal coaching too. But this idea that we're living in the future, right? So whatever future we're living into. So the thought is whatever future we're living into is giving our actions in the moment, right? Kind of good. And there's some good applications for that. I still actually would teach that in certain situations under circumstances with a limited kind of use. But that's said this in this article or meme or whatever I read the other day too, but it said, but the problem is life is happening now. And that's interesting the way you're kind of pointing out to the sort of disassociation or cognitive dissonance that creates, and we know the human brain is not great with cognitive dissonance. We do all kinds of things to ourselves when the reality this reality and this reality don't seem to match, we get a little, quite honestly, nutty. And disassociation is the first step of kind of psychologically defending.
Yeah. The other piece in the background of all that is in the Landmark Forum, nothing's the truth, just try it on. But what you really get left with is something that's like the truth.
Yes, right.
That who you are is your word, and that's it.
Yeah, there's nothing. This is one of my big gripes with this model. And yeah, there's nothing else. The circumstances, the situation, the other people. That's part of why this movement is called, the Human Potential Movement, is now known as the Me Movement. And I love John Atack says this really funny thing about, imagine if all, whatever, 10 billion people on the planet, however many it is right now, but if it really was true that we all create our own reality and our own results and our own circumstances, it's kind of like the MLM thing. If you go 13 people out in an MLM, you've exceeded the population of the planet. The math doesn't work. But I think in this, the idea doesn't work either. When taken overboard, which is what you're talking about there, which is which by the way is complete brainwashing technique. Empty your mind, set aside everything you know, suspend your thinking for these 3 days. You can pick it back up on the door on your way out. By the way, folks out there listening, you go into any training that says that, turn around and leave, decline. That is, first of all, it's not even a thing that can be done. But second of all, you're now headed into a situation where manipulation, brainwashing, mind control, it's a straight up techniques. that we take all that out and then we're going to put all this stuff in, but it's not the truth, except for it's presented as the truth. It's not just presented as the truth, it's presented as the miracle, right? You're going to create miracles if you just see it this way. It's crazy. Okay, so there you are in war, and you've created this because you don't kind of fit into all the ones that the military is offering.
I don't want to. I don't belong. I don't fit in. I'm not in, like, everything in me is against what I'm about to go do. My dad, by the way.
I'm curious because I can just hear somebody's going to ask this in the question, so I'll ask it here. Why did you join? Why did you join the National Guard? What was your...
I had no prospects. Like, we were poor. And I was smart and ambitious, and I wanted to go to college. And I chose the National Guard specifically because I watched the National Guard come and sandbag my community near the Mississippi when the river flooded in '93. Like entire communities were like underwater, and the National Guard was there sandbagging to keep us safe. And it was like, if I have to join the military, I want to serve that way.
Right.
I want to be here to take care of the people I care about. And so we get the call. I'm on the night before reporting to the base, staying at a hotel. My dad is there, and like I just remember watching TV, and the Dixie Chicks were in the middle of getting blasted for speaking out against the Bush administration. Like the whole country was in an uproar.
Yeah.
And my dad says, "You don't have to go. Just tell them you're gay. Get out. You can get out. You don't have to do this." And I had to honor my word.
I was just going to say, you got caught in the word trap, didn't you?
So that I knew that I was worth something when I spoke.
Which, for folks listening, is drilled in you in every way possible, in every level, in every aspect of landmark training is sort of based on that idea that who we are is our word. That's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then they have a whole model for which I still like, again, in the right application, in the right place, right? So that is, yeah, you are your word. And that's the end of that. I got you. Yeah.
I went and I did some things that were remarkable. I saw things as a result of that, like that future that I cast for myself that I might not have noticed otherwise. Like the desert is still the most beautiful place in the world I've ever been. Like just unmistakably breathtakingly powerful, and like mankind is incapable of shaping that landscape.
Right. Yes.
Gorgeous.
I've spent some time in the desert in the UAE, and
It
yeah,
just like boom, struck. I brewed coffee every day. There's like, what can I do to make people feel at home? What can I do to create an environment of connection? What can I do to foster family? What can I do to have people engaged in like beauty and connection? I brewed coffee. And we set like folding lawn chairs out around like the tool shed in the airstrip.
uh-huh.
And people sat in like 120, 130, 140 degree sunshine, drinking hot coffee and taking a 15-minute break together and just chatting. Like I carved out that environment, right? So like extraordinary impact. And people remembered that like the 20-year reunion a few years ago.
Yeah, you're creating family basically, right?
So, good. I came back. And like things happen. Things happened in a war zone. I had like the daily fear of being found out. I had to, like, there's all sorts. And there was like this one major main thing where I felt like I had uh, discovered within myself that I could and I was willing to sacrifice absolutely everything I believed in about myself and about humanity. Like there were like hundreds of thousands of lives on the line. And I had to make a decision. And either way, something inside me was going to die. While I was in the army, while I was overseas, I was on perimeter duty in a tower, and like I made the choice. I mean, other soldiers were throwing candy bars and toys and whatever over the fence to these kids that walk home from school every day. On the wrong side of the canal, right up against the chain link fence, where anything is supposed to be disposed of immediately without hesitation. And apparently it happened every day. And these kids begged for stuff, and like, I like to follow the rules because I'm a freaking soldier in a war zone, and like, rules have consequences. But this kid asked for water because the baby was sick and they didn't have clean water. And I tossed a bottle of water over the fence. Shouldn't have done it. Against the rules. And on the opposite side of the fence is cornfield, like an irrigated cornfield between like Balad and the Tigris was like these field. And kid takes off, like jumps the irrigation ditch and takes off through the corn. Okay, and I forget all about it. Not a until later, something is coming through the cornfield back toward my tower. And I can't tell what it is, but it's making a beeline straight toward the fence. And there's a gap in between the fields, and I can see that it's a person. And it looks like at least there's a handgun far out, but like I'm on that perimeter to ensure that there's no threat. I like radio in, get the go ahead, and at that point in time, like people are like suicide bombing the bases. So like I don't like it could just be somebody running toward the fence with an explosive vest. I have no idea. And I am supposed to neutralize the threat. And it's the moment where I have to decide if I'm killing someone in this war or not. Like I had crossed that line. I dealt with death, I dealt with fear, I dealt with my own survival or lack of surviving. And it was choose time. And that moment where I knew I could give up everything that I believed in, everything that I thought I was, everything that I valued. Like, are human beings holy? Is there something sacred in humanity that deserves to have the benefit of the doubt, that deserves to like live and be expressed? Like, is there something that unites us? And if the whatever it is, I don't know, it's the kid. If the whatever it is gets to the fence and blows a hole in it, then like how many thousands of people are going to die if I don't think of that? And I don't like. I still to this day don't recall choosing. I did pull that trigger 1,000 times in that one breath, and I didn't. And I filed through all the consequences, and I didn't pull the trigger. I risked it.
Mhm.
And what came out of the cornfield about 15 feet from the fence was the same kid
Mm.
gripping a cucumber that was bent at a 90-degree angle in his fist, and another one in the other fist. And he came up to the fence and like convinced me to come down and gave us the vegetables from his garden.
Mm.
Mother sent him back with vegetables to say thank you for the water. And that kid almost died. The kid almost died because I initiated a kindness. The kid almost died because I was afraid. The kid almost died because I had orders. Like, and I spent 20 years suppressing, working upon, like dealing with the fracture in myself that came from that moment.
Mm.
With all the other things, but that's a big whopping moment
Right. Right.
where something I couldn't repair or reconcile happened.
Mhm. It's like you
And
chose your heart in that moment, and I mean, not chose, like, in this conscious way, but, like, you went with your instinct, with your heart, with something, that told you not to pull that trigger, but
well, and like the experience of it, they're just, I wasn't there.
Mm, mm.
It was all I had to do was breathe out. And I didn't know if my finger was going to squeeze the trigger when I breathed out or if it wasn't. And it did. And like, I wasn't going to miss that shot. So there's, and like held up against, who I am is my word. Who I am is what I have to say about like myself and the world and the future. And here I am in this situation. Like, if I kill that kid, I'm protecting everyone on this base. Am I going to risk everybody on this base because I have some values or I've made up some future about like beauty and family and connection? Am I going to stand for that or am I going to protect who I'm sworn to protect?
Mm. And you
Like
feel like
that,
that was the choice that you were
it was it
grappling,
was a,
whether recognized or not, but
it was one of many layers of that choice. But that layer in that moment existed is ridiculous. My identity as a person, like my ability to recognize and honor myself and my sense of like my absolute sense of worth was at risk because of that juxtaposition is it was unnecessary. That level of who I am is my worth, that way that I related to myself was so built inside the landmark ideology that no matter which choice I made, I violated my word.
gotcha.
And
That's
I,
what you then later are that unraveling in your trauma work. Yeah, I can see how you definitely would never unravel that in I mean, the thing in Landmark about you can honor your word instead of keep it, that I wouldn't quite cover that situation, I don't think.
like, I spent a lot of time and a lot of programs dealing with that incident.
Mhm.
It, it came up in everything. There was always another layer. But what never got touched by the landmark work was the level of panic that surges in my body.
Mm.
Like, what never got addressed was the sense that one wrong decision is the end of the world. That everything starts to spiral out of control if I don't navigate this moment successfully.
In fact, I would say that experience got reinforced. I mean, just knowing what I know about being on staff, even though I never experienced any abuse in general, my staff experience was good. But there was this constant, like, if you don't make that target by the end of the week, the transformation of life itself is you've put it at risk. And that is the culture, that is the staff culture, in particularly the centers area, which is the primary area. Even though, like, we mentally kind of know, like, that's not true, like, not like with that kid, a person could have died, right? Whether it's the people on the base, if he had had some kind of a explosive device, or it was the kid, but the brain kind of doesn't know the difference really in our physiological responses. I mean, I know a lot of staff members who have, really Friday at 3 o'clock is still not a comfortable time. Like 3:01, oh, but Friday before 3. So for those that don't know, that's the weekly target deadline in Landmark is Fridays at 3. So that Fridays were rough and, and that's still in our body in a way, right? Unless we learn how to really dismantle that. And those tools just aren't going to help you dismantle that because it's those tools that kind of got used to reinforce it.
Memorial Day was rough, and the 4th of July was rough, and like
Yeah.
you know,
Lots.
it just there. there are tools to dismantle the non-language based existence of trauma. And Landmark won't touch them, and Landmark won't tell you that it's insufficient to the test. That scenario played out, and I came home when we came home after being extended like 4 or 5 times, and something in me had died. And I had a remarkable conversation with someone my aunt connected me with, who was able to just listen and hear all of it. The kinds of things that I couldn't say to people because everyone was all fired up about how good of a patriot they were. And a lot of the burden of that disappeared. Like I wasn't alone in it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to Landmark to deal with the impact.
Right.
And again, what that looked like was casting out more future, right? Like living into a vision for something that was worth my life to live for, rather than the like kind of default experience that was present after that kind of trauma.
Yeah. This is an important piece you're talking about, which is because I've come to see that. I mean, I learned that way of thinking from the future, thinking from an invented future, all that. I mean, it's just ingrained in me. It actually still is. But I also, one of the things that happened a lot in Landmark, I heard quite often, and I've heard from a number of leaders even since, is this whole thing about like hope is bullshit. And one of the things I noticed in my daughter's treatment, so for the last 11 years, I've been, I mean, walking beside her in her journey, and we have spent tens of thousands of dollars on all kinds of therapeutic models and all, I mean, just tons and tons and tons of things. And from the magnets on the brain to different drugs to different, rapid transformation therapy to cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT, blah, 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 blah. But one of the things that struck me throughout that I really got, because I used to kind of I don't know if I poo-pooed hope or not, but I know that's a big part of the conversation in that lexicon. But I got at a certain point, I was like, oh my God, when she was at the height of suicidal, I was like, oh, because she doesn't have anything to live for. Like she doesn't have any hope. I've written a couple articles about this, but I think hope is so essential. And we can call, living into an invented future to me, but what that's fundamentally giving us is hope. And that hope helps keep us literally, what I discovered with my daughter, literally alive in moments when she did not want to be alive.
Well, and it took, I like disagree a little,
Yeah,
but
good. Yeah,
there's
tell me what you
nuance
think.
in it. Like it wasn't, I don't know that that's actually hope, but it's purpose.
Yeah, very good. Okay.
So like hope, like something could come, something could arise, something could appear.
Or maybe, do you think maybe hope is the emotion? So if I have a purpose that I've created for myself, I have a future I've created for myself, I have a vision, I have a dream. I mean, we all have vision boards, all that. It's almost like the emotion that's there, because I've learned a lot about emotion since leaving also, but
Yeah.
is this emotion of this hope, this desire. Dr. John Hunter talks about activating the seeking mechanism in our brain, which is kind of the same mechanism, like where we're left. Or similarly, sorry, Dr. John, if I'm slaughtering this, but it's this idea that it can get better, it will get better, or it can be different or whatnot, that carries us through in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And that, like hope in that scenario, like where you've like created something to live for, like you
Mhm.
designed a purpose for yourself, that that hope is in response to something manufactured
Mhm.
rather than hope for hope's sake, like an experience of like hope without some like underlying foundation or responsibility. So like I'm still having this conversation with myself about happiness.
Mm.
Like I don't have happiness. I just don't. Like I have neutral and I have upset. Like
I have
and happiness is a response that for me, after all, like I'm still deprogrammed, right? So after all of that, like, happiness is really only available if I'm being of service and engaged in the fulfillment of something. I don't get to wake up happy.
It's
I don't
funny.
have happiness in my relationship with my partner. It's not that I'm unhappy. It's just that, like, I'm not being used for some greater purpose. There's uh, like, there's another, there's so many cans of worms here, right? Like, there's a whole additional, like, aside from who you are as your word, there's this thing that, uh, part of what Landmark is about is performance, like the performance of a human being that I could put in the face of anything. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of what that looked like, in particular, how it relates to my military service and other things predating that and PTSD, is the setting aside of my, what they call the internal state, my thinking, my feeling, like the gas in my guts, like whatever's going on inside of me that isn't my word, setting it aside as irrelevant in the face of my commitment, in the face of my word, in the face of what I am out to fulfill or create or cause. So I disregard my internal state and invent something worth living for 20 years after coming back from a war.
Mm-hmm.
And I I did
Well,
testing with
so
it.
far, Brian, that sounds pretty good.
I mean, it
Like,
does, until I'm like about to swear, until you're exhausted,
yeah, we'll mark the episode as explicit.
until you're fucking exhausted. Like,
Yeah, see,
20
that's
years
the
later,
thing.
I'm like depressed and I'm tired and I just don't, it's like I don't want to get up and deal with the daily drama of my life and have to invent and create and generate what's worth living for. I'm tired of generating what's worth living for. I'm
Well,
tired of having the internal state that I have to set aside because it's so heavy at this point.
but see, I think that's part of it here. Do you think maybe, because as I've learned more about when I left Landmark, I started immediately doing other teachings and trainings and things, but I really focused on things that were like looking at what's going on with me below the neck. That's why I used to joke. I want to find out what's going on below the neck, because everything in Landmark lexicon, not everything in the wisdom, we looked a tiny, teeny bit at your structural conversations and whatnot, but for the most part, everything in these kinds of trainings is all about the mind. It is literally mind over matter, like taken to the nth degree. And to me, it occurs now, like I now understand it takes enormous energy to ignore, to suppress, to push down, like enormous energy. And I can hardly imagine like being in a war zone, what that must be, because you've got to ignore like that you could be hit by a rocket. You got to, you know what I mean? Like you can't, there's a lot that you're screening out, I would imagine. And so now if we extrapolate that into everyday life, yeah. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that right now. Cause I know I jokingly say I'm watching the news like I watch an eclipse now. Cause my nervous system can only handle so much. I'm like, "Ah." So, but the problem for me always with this idea that what was going on with me internally, which is the language used in Landmark, was something to put aside, to ignore, has been particularly dangerous, actually. But also, I really resonate with what you're saying about exhausting, because it's exhausting because it's not really true that mind can operate over matter. It really is not. I cannot. Remember, we used to say, you're going to, if you do the Landmark work, and I think this was mostly around the leadership course, where did we use this enrollment line, that you'll be a kind of person who says chair and chair falls out of your mouth. We were literally telling people that they were going to have such power with reality as it is by the tool of their word that they would be able to create reality. Well, that's true if you disassociate enough. So you're using all these tools. So you come back from war. I'm just see if I'm tracking this correctly. And wait, I have to do a little bit of a sidebar on your happiness thing. So I have an assignment for you. If you haven't watched it, one of my all-time favorite movies is Hector and the Search for Happiness. I've seen it like 5 or 6 times. And when we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic, I was participating in some study, and we had I had his app. And you were supposed to get on the app 2 or 3 times a day. And it had like 15, 16 kind of experiences, sad, angry, emotions, right? And you would slide the thing like, how much did you experience that in this day? And that I did that for like 3 years. And it was I learned a lot about how to actually tune into my emotional set and use that as a kind of an aspect of who I am, a warning system. Like there's information in whatever's arising, whatever's going on with us internally has a bunch of really good information for us. Some bad information, but also good information. But anyway, I would always get to the one on happiness and I would get so angry because I'm like, how the fuck do I know? Let's see, my businesses are shut down. I'm scared to death about finances. I'm blah, blah, blah. Like, how do I? And I would like fight with this app because it would make me every day, 2 or 3 times a day, say whether I was happy or not. And I was so like, I don't know. How do I know if I'm happy? Like somebody give me the measure that, anyway, it was hilarious. I mean, now it's hilarious because I was just so silly with it. But it was crazy anyway, and I watched this movie partway through and whatnot, and now, we all get to say what happiness is, and I have a different relationship to happiness, and I have it more like something that shows up. It comes and goes, it ebbs and flows. It's here when it's here, and it's not when it's not, and that's that. I no longer fight with the app about that. But anyway, sorry, I had to bring that because it was just so funny you brought up happiness. I was, 2 years of fighting with happiness because I'm like, I don't know. How do I know? But I do think it's in part maybe a little bit what you were saying, because also during the pandemic for me is where I began deconstructing my 25 years of, being deeply embedded in the culture of Landmark, not just because I worked there and I taught there and I was a leader there, but from the time I did the Landmark Forum at roughly 26 years old, I pretty much, that's what I did. I mean, I didn't do anything else. I went to church sometimes, read some books, mostly because I was in the wisdom area and they actually encouraged us to do that. So I never did make it through Foucault, but but that was it. Like I was living my life from those ideas and those distinctions, which is a mandate when you're a leader and a staff member for sure. You have to, but it's also the only thing that's practical because you're working so much, so long. Your entire community is that. Like it becomes high control in a different way than how most people think of. People think when we say that, it means like somebody had bars on the doors. No, no, no. That's not how high control environments work, actually. That's prison, that's jailing, that's kidnapping. So that's not that. High control environments use coercive control, use groupthink, use literal brainwashing techniques, like to have people voluntarily stay and do the things that are generally, while somewhat can be helpful to the individual, but are generally in service of the enterprise, of the organization, of the business, not of that person. And that's an exchange that we are very indoctrinated in as a society. I mean, it starts in school and goes through our work environments and whatnot. So when you come across a seminar group that's saying like, oh, hey, do this, but pretty soon when that's all you're doing, and that happens slowly, you don't notice that that's all you're doing. And you can't think outside of that set. Yeah. So here you are. So you've got this future, you've got this like invented purpose, but you're suppressing, ignoring, putting aside.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The symptoms,
Mm.
the physical, like the chemical surging, reactions and responses. Like I'm waking up and disregarding nightmares and exhaustion to like, because energy is just energy, right? Just like generate more. And in my 20s, like I could do that.
I think you're I think you're kind of pointing at the other thing, like Dr. John talks about the dopamine high, right? So we learn in a large group awareness training, people often fixate on the large group part. That's a small aspect of it, is this thing we were talking about earlier, this setting aside your critical thinking, flooding the brain till it literally shuts off, and then giving a huge reward. So you take the brain like way down and then you give a huge reward, like, got it. Oh my gosh, and it just takes one person in the room to have a transformation, have a breakthrough, have a gotcha, got it moment. And then the group will, then everybody starts doing that. But what his hypothesis points to is there's a flooding of dopamine that's happening in the brain. There's this like high. Well, then we get addicted to that. And I do not know a former staff member who has not had some degree of autoimmune disease or adrenal fatigue or burnout at the most. And I think when I started hearing Dr. Hunter talk, I was like, oh, it's because we're amping ourselves up on adrenaline and dopamine all the time. Because your brain starts, that's possibility. Possibility and purpose means that you're like on this high, you're in a hypomanic state, really. And we can manufacture that. That's John's hypothesis, that it isn't just a matter of how our brain chemistry happens to be, where we can literally manufacture that. And that's what large group awareness trainings, that's the danger of them fundamentally, is that they are training your brain and you to manufacture this kind of dopamine high, hypomanic state, and it feels good. Tony, our producer, refers to it as chasing the dragon, right? Like the addiction term. And I love that term because that's exactly what it's like. But yeah, doing that for 20 years. When you come back, somewhere in here you go on staff, right? Like your involvement isn't just doing courses at this point. Doesn't your involvement get...
So I spent probably 3 or 4 years consistently in a seminar. Like
Okay.
the upside of the group thing is they have some other experience of me than the one that I have, right? They get to like, and it's a safe, the experience is it's a safe place to express.
Mhm.
So there are a group of people that I meet with every week in the seminar, and then we meet outside the seminar to assess and like do our assignments and stuff. I build a community of people who can like hold like the level of my dissatisfaction with myself as a human being and poke holes in my theories about myself
Mhm.
that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. Like it's that model of like being of service and contribution, right? Of like we serve each other that way. And there's value in that for sure. But I didn't read other stuff. I didn't do other books. It was all landmark.
Mm.
And then like you said, it was well, why would I go to work 9 to 5 when I could go work at Landmark? And all I'd have to do is get out of bed every day. And every minute of my waking life would be in service of making a difference and changing the world. And then I just have to do my laundry. Like, great. No more search for meaning.
Right.
And at 25, I went on Landmark staff at the world headquarters office in San Francisco. And I like this is like the ridiculous bit. They paid my relocation. I moved to San Francisco in 2008 for an annual salary of $32,000.
My God. Are you the one who said in our group one time that you actually had just gotten an offer from Wells Fargo Bank or something too? Like you turned down some big job. Was that you?
Well, yeah.
I've heard that story a few times, so I don't know if it came from you or other. I mean, not specifically
Well,
Wells Fargo.
yeah. While I was working at Landmark, so after a year, and I moved to be a receptionist. Like that was it. I like upended everything and moved to San Francisco to be a receptionist at Landmark World Headquarters.
You're in San Francisco, one of the most expensive cities to live in, and $32,000 a year.
Yep. And like I roomed with producer Tony, and until I found a place of my own, and that place of my own was a bedroom and like a duplex with like 5 other people. I just like made it work. I just made it work because that's what you do. And while I was working at Landmark, within a year, I promoted into global payroll manager. So I was managing records and payroll processing and HR data management for the entire company worldwide. Um, that like 60, 70, 80 hours a week was common. There were nights that I slept on the couch in the lobby and got up before anybody got in the office so I didn't get caught, so that I could continue to do more work. Right. And while I was working there, I started singing with the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. And one of the gentlemen that I befriended was in payroll at Wells Fargo. And he was like, we could, like, there's no, for what the level of payroll processing that you do, like, you should be making way more money. Like, come over to Wells Fargo. Like, I've got a spot for you. I was like, no, I love where I am. I was a lifer.
Yeah.
I was never going anywhere else. Like, this is what I was going to do with my whole life, was work at Landmark World Headquarters and like stand at the hub of transformation for the entire planet.
You were a true believer, as Tony says.
And you know, things happened, and I got out, and but it was hard being a staff member. It's hard having your personal, like, my personality was up for revision as a staff member. If
Well,
I had a
that's worth talking about for a minute too, because this is a thing. If you have not gone on staff or gone into leadership in a group like this, it's really hard to understand. And we can see that from the way some people interact with our conversations in the Facebook group. But they're like, but why didn't you just leave? But why didn't you tell them you couldn't work that many hours? Why didn't, like, or whatever, right? And there's countless lawsuits. Like, we found all of these lawsuits now, and almost most of them are employment lawsuits. By the way, I just looked up in 2009, San Francisco's median household income was approximately $70,247. So when we make the comment, folks, that people in these groups, and this group particularly, were paid under market value, like, that's true. Now we could go into what was receptionist paid and like that, but I promise you it's going to be a livable wage. And it's hard to work for a company that's all about a world that works for everyone with no one and nothing left out, except for all the people who work for the company can't function in their lives. I mean, they can't support themselves without coming together in big groups and doing pretty extraordinary things. Anyway, but this whole thing that you're saying about it's the purpose, it's the supplanted purpose that keeps you there. And in the process of, before you get there, you've sort of exported your life purpose. It's not Brian's purpose anymore. And there is a whole thing on staff. That's what it means to be a staff member. A staff member in this culture is a distinction. It is somebody who has said themselves to be accountable for the future of the enterprise fulfilled. It is very akin to a nun who takes a vow of poverty to be, she's not just doing the church works, she is being the church, or he, because they have male.
yeah,
Any company or organization, and there are other companies that aren't personal development growth companies that actually try to play on this a lot. Like, you are the company, and it's a kind of supplanting of your own identity with the group identity. So in this case, it happens to be a company. It could be a party. We have the same thing going on with our political parties. It can be communism, it can be capitalism, it can be like whatever, but you're filling in with a kind of ideology or doctrine and saying, okay, that's who I am. And but it's just, there's something particularly hypocritical about it in an organization that's supposedly about you being your truest self. So you can be your truest self unless you're a program leader, a staff member, and then you need to be what we say that is.
except I took the job. I said I'm a staff member, and anything other than my word was not to be honored. Anything other than being a staff member that I gave my word to was not who I really was. It was to be disregarded. And not just by others, but also by myself. That's what it took to live into that future.
So
So
again, Brian, I can hear people are listening to some are going like, well, that sounds pretty amazing. So
it,
how do you feel about that? Like, tell us a little bit more
so,
about the flip side, not the flip side exactly, but what was the impact of that, I guess, is the
yeah.
right, what's the impact of that rigidity and that decision on Brian, on you?
So, like, I'm gonna gloss over the years that I was on staff and the things that happened and blah 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 blah. How this ties back to PTSD is I like it was like it didn't happen. I was cured. I functioned. I managed payroll in 14 countries and personnel records for thousands of employees single-handedly, I held accountable the managers of every landmark center on the planet for ensuring that their employment paperwork was correct and accurate, or it got corrected.
Wow, well, you were there when I went from being a staff member to an employee.
So there was people would meet me, people who are close in my life forget that I'm a combat veteran because I purged it from myself because it didn't serve me.
And it didn't serve that purpose or that future, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Who has time to be irritated all the time? Like low grade irritated, waiting to explode. Depressed.
Mhm,
PTSD symptom, by the way.
mhm, right.
Like, who can tolerate freezing in moments of confrontation or surprise? I had no room for that in my life. I had no tolerance for that systemic trauma, like the body keeps the score.
Mhm.
I denied myself the opportunity to allow my body to do what it does. I had to triumph over myself to show up, and I did it ongoing for years. And I left and I maintained that level of a rigid grip on who I am. I rebuilt myself from being a broken, PTSD riddled veteran. Like you say, you can build those environments. You can build that euphoria. You can build those futures to get those dopamine hits. I every waking moment was filled with managing myself and my environment so that the world could be what I said I was committed to it being, so that I could be who I said I was interested in being, with no allowance for what showed up automatically, what showed up naturally. If it didn't match who I wanted to be, it got denied. And I got exhausted. I got exhausted eventually. I mean, it sounds
I mean, I
yeah,
think one thing that a lot of folks don't know, and I'd love to get somebody to actually do some numbers on this or some surveys, but the amount of staff members of an organization like this that end up sick, like really sick, is it's startling. I know many, many, many past staff members. I don't know any that aren't dealing with some level of physical illness. So everything from stroke, cancer, burnout is on the low side, autoimmune is pretty much guaranteed. So alopecia, that's what you see in these lawsuits after lawsuits a lot, is because people actually PTSD from their staff experience, which
sure.
we can maybe have another call about that, but why that would happen. But so there you are. How many years? So you said 20.
It was about 5 years on staff.
Okay.
And when I left, so the whole time I was employed by the organization, I was also assisting, which is the internal language for volunteering in exchange for my own personal development. And that's a whole conversation. I like there's value in that model. Again, there's extraordinary value in that model. And
No, I have some pretty big doubts about that. I've actually been told by an attorney now that it's illegal.
oh, for sure. The way that Landmark does it, absolutely. There's something available in being of service. And
Something available. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's what they've absconded with to
exactly.
basically get. I mean, this is what the Department of Labor essentially says in the multiple opinions that they get on this. Is like, no, you can't have people volunteering who are actually running your business. But now you have employees that are paid, clock out, and then come do more hours. Like in the UK and in some places that literally violates domestic servitude and slavery laws. Like it's so unethical. It's hard to even
Yeah.
get our heads around.
The
Now,
way
did we
around
produce
it,
value for ourselves? Of course.
sure.
You have to do that in order to stay in that. And I love the way you describe too, how you are pumping yourself up. You're putting all this stuff aside, all these feelings, all these experiences, even sometimes alert systems. There was a lot where I saw things that were not consistent with my values and what I say my life is about. And I put it aside because I'm like, well, it's in a cost benefit analysis. It's going to be okay, except for it turned out not to be so okay in the end, right? It was temporarily. Okay. So what had you leave staff? I'm curious.
I got married.
And you wanted to see your spouse?
And they were in England. So we met online. He flew back and forth a bunch. Like we spent extended periods together. And he was gonna move to San Francisco, except his dad was near terminal with Parkinson's in the UK. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, you're not missing the last days with your dad. Like, I will relocate. And I did. And as much as I fought to create and carve out a position for myself with Landmark, they weren't interested. Like, my spouse was not a Landmark person. I was told that, this is the part where people who leave staff get all sorts of crazy shit. Like, you can't have your transformation and be in a relationship with people who aren't transformed. It's not possible. Like, I can't have this relationship if I want to, and
Can we just say how insane that is, though? Where the whole you guys, you got to get the total cognitive dissonance here, because the whole promise of the program is one of the major areas that they promise is you're going to have these incredible relationships. But the byline that they don't say till you're in is, as long as everybody in your life is doing the Landmark form and you're all just doing that. How is that not culty? Like, that is the very definite, it just makes me crazy. So, because you're not the first staff member that's, I've heard that a lot. Like, and I wouldn't know, I married my registration manager. So our whole wedding was a self-expression and leadership project. So we were kind of like golden, but I do remember saying to some friends of mine and stuff at a time, some of them that were even Landmark graduates, and they're like, how come we never spend time together anymore? How come? I said, look, I got to just be honest with you. If I love you, I love hanging out with you, but the only way we're going to spend time together is if you come and volunteer on one of my teams, because I have no space for anything else. And, in my parenting, definitely, I was not there a lot for my kids and things like that. But it's just that I just want to underline, highlight, and circle that, because it gets said. And in the moment that it's said, you're kind of like, oh, well, that makes sense. But you don't realize that is literally a total opposite of what we say to people we're trying to register in the programs. So yeah, that's insane. All right. So you fall in love and you get married and
I maintain assisting agreements. So at that point, I was accountable. Part of the first year I went on staff with Landmark was also my first time assisting at the Conference for Global Transformation, which is put on by the Wisdom Course area. All sorts of people come from all over the world and share the projects they're doing, the things they're doing to impact communities and make a difference in the world. There were keynote speakers from
and basically to applaud Landmark as the source of all that. I used to run that. Yeah.
And recently it's turned into plugging Landmark. But it is,
dude, it all was.
Talking like 2008.
Yeah.
There was a different culture then.
It used to have some outside speakers and stuff in, and that got a little quashed. Then it became only outside speakers who were very successful Landmark people and whatnot. And then I stopped going. I mean, I used to go as a staff member because I was there. Yeah, I was a staff member. So I had an accountability role there. But then I continued. That was where I kind of continued to stay plugged in until one year I went and I put together, I'm a networker, connector, and I happened to know 3 people that were in positions in the world that they had a similar commitment and passion for transformation, being alive and real in the Middle East. And I hosted just a little wine cocktail thing with these 4 people to introduce them to each other, because they all had like pieces of resource that could be, and they could really support each other and work together and like really create something, maybe do something, create something. And I had just we did 2 being a leader courses, one in Abu Dhabi, one in Dubai. So I was like, oh, you guys all need to know each other because you all have the same commitment that you're passionate about, and you have unique and different positions. If you come together, you can create something really great. Sounds like something that you would be an obvious thing. We go to conferences to network, would be an obvious thing for, a conference is about global transformation. And anyway, I got in big trouble for that, and I was literally told that I could not do that and that was totally inappropriate. And I'm like, what the fuck? That's the only reason I come here, is to meet and network with people who are now out in the world using the work of Landmark, which I was still a true believer in at that point, putting it to work in the world. That was the point. That's what we were there for. And then I got in trouble for introducing people that were in this. And I was just like, okay, that was when I knew there was, plus the speakers had gotten more and more about Landmark. And I was like, no, this is fake. This is not real.
Thank you for watching part 1 of our conversation with Brian. If you're a veteran and you need help, please go to veteranscrisisline.net. Please take care of yourselves, everyone.